Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best build for all 87 brawlers in the game right now. Buzz Lightyear, you can't really switch out the build, but yeah, we're going through every single one. I'll be leaving a timestamp in the description so you guys can go through them. It's going to be in alphabetical order as well, just to make it easier for you guys. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I update this every couple of months, even though things don't really change too much. Maybe there's a few preferences that do change, so you guys are most up to date with everything. So to begin with, you have 8-bit, so the same old really cheat cartridge is going to be your go-to one in pretty much everywhere. Even Heist is pretty good, but for Heist, extra credit is going to be a little bit better. If you had to pick one, it had to be cheat cartridge, and again, boosted booster is the better one by far. Against tougher matchups, you want to go plugged in, but boosted booster is the reason why I use 8-bit. And then the health gear and the reload gear I pretty much go every single time now. There's no reason not to go this, it's just so good. And then the hypercharge is very mid, I wouldn't recommend getting it. Next up, we've got Amber. So with Amber, Dancing Flames is by far the best gadget for her. I mean, this one might be okay if you're good into, like, if you're going into snipers, but still, this one's just so good, especially in Heist, to counter tanks. Also, star powers, both for a little bit meh for her, because most of the time, you want to just throw out your super anyways, but Wild Flames just is the better one. And then in terms of her gears, sometimes I like to swap out quite a lot with Amber. I think you never go wrong with her reload speed, and then it's either +1 or the vision gear for me, because you use Amber on bushier maps, and she's really good with the vision gear. Next up, we've got Angelo. So Angelo, both gadgets are really good. For the kind of casual player, Sting and Flight is the better one. For the pros and for the master Angelo players, this is by far the one that pros use the most. It's so deadly. 4k damage for a wall is insane. Empower is by far the better star power. Float does have some use to it, but Empower is just way better. And then I go for health and shield, because of course Angelo hardly ever recovers health. So next up, we got Ashton. So in terms of gadgets, Chill Pill is the better gadget overall, because if you combine it with your super, you basically just gain 3k health back, and then you still have your rage. So really good combination. First Bash is by far the better star power as well. The other one, I don't know, you just rather just get to full rage as quickly as possible. And then in terms of your gears, you mostly play your Ash on those bushier maps. Non-bushy maps, health gear, so you probably want 3 gears with him. The hypercharge is very good, so definitely recommend buying it. Next up, we've got Barley. So both gadgets are really good for Barley. Most of the time in ranked, you want to use Herbal Tonic, but if you play a lot of ladder, Sticky Syrup probably is the better one overall, so just bear that in mind. In terms of star powers, medical use probably is the better one overall, but especially against tanks, you want to use extra nauseous. So both of them are really good, so it's really hard to pick with Barley. And then I actually go for +1 and shield gear with Barley, just because it's just better, because his gadgets are really good and really helpful. Next up, we've got B. So with B, Rattled Hive is going to be your better one pretty much all of the time. This is only really good into like Gene or other snipers, but still I'd rather just go Rattled Hive. Really good for pressure. Honeycomb is the better star power, as I explained in my pro tip video. The reason why people use the star power is because it allows you to get closer to your opponent, so it's easy to hit B shot. So go with this. You can't, this is a good star power as well, so I wouldn't really be like too sad if you get it out of a star drop. Both of them are pretty good. And then you definitely want to go to shield gear with B, because she is squishy. And then you want to either opt for the +1, because you can spam out Rattled Hive, which gets you so much pressure, or damage. You can't go wrong with either. Next up, we've got Belle. So Belle, 2 really good gadgets. I think Nest Egg is probably, well, it's a more useful one. You're going to get most value out of it most of the time. This is really good in the hands of pro Belle players, and especially on like knockout, etc., just to get that first hit in. Positive feedback is by far the better star power to use, even though grounded is used quite a bit in ranked, and you probably don't realize, because it's pretty good into those assassins, which of course normally counter Belle. And then I pretty much never swap away from this build, because reload speed gear is so good, and the shield gear is really good. The hypercharge is actually really good as well. Even though the hypercharge super isn't good, it just feels really nice on Belle. Next up, we've got Berry. So friendship is great, 90%, and then of course this gadget in Heist, but most of the time you'll be using Berry in like Hot Zone, Gem Grab. You only really use him in like one Heist map, so bear that in mind. Floor is fine 100% of the time. And then +1 and shield. You can maybe use damage with him, but I just like the +1, because even the healing from the gadget charges up his super, so I really like that fact. And then Bibi with Bibi, you want the heal gadget 100% of the time, and then probably 99% of the time home run. There is the rare instance where some people like this, but All the pros use home run, it's just a better one. And then again with Bibi, it just depends on what map you play. Most of the time it's a bushy map, and then other times you might want to go with like the health gear. So now moving on to both, starting off with the gadgets actually. So the gadgets, I like Super Totem more just because it allows you to cycle super quickly and you can tank sniper shots with it, so pretty effective. A lot of people like Tripwire, it's good on Brewable and can be good to surprise the opponents. It's personal preference, but I use Super Totem. And then of course the stun star power all of the time. This is only useful on Snake Prairie and a few showdown maps, so just go with this one. And then I never swap away from health and reload. It's just such a good combination. Of course sometimes you play bow and bushy maps as well, so vision can be good, but health is really underrated on him. Next up we got Bonnie, so Sugar Rush and Black Powder, just don't even need to debate it. And then +1 and the supercharged gear all of the time. I literally never swap away from that build because Bonnie is useless, so you literally need to go with that Selp. So next up we got Brock. So Rocket Fuel is one of the best gadgets in the game. So good for, it's literally the reason why I use Brock, basically to open up the map and counter like throwers or just other brawlers. So Rocket Fuel, I mean Rocket Laces is still a pretty good gadget, especially if you play a lot of ladder, but Rocket Fuel is good, and also good to confirm kills as well. Really big rocket. Also, most of the time I always go reload speed because of course it's got super slow reload speed, but I like to go shield because it's super squishy as well. Sometimes you might want to go +1, I don't know, or damage and heist, but you can never go wrong with that combination. And then more rockets is by far the better star power, by the way. I mean, maybe on knockout you might want to go with this or bounty, but to confirm more kills, more rockets is just by far the better one. And of course it combines with hypercharge as well, but the hypercharge is terrible, just wouldn't recommend getting it. Next up we've got Bull. So Bull, Stomper all of the time. In heist people do use T-Bone Injector, but Stomper is by far the better one, of course it is. And then in terms of star powers, again you want to go Berserker and heist, and you want to go Tough Guy everywhere else. And then with Bull, it depends what type of Bull player you are. If you're just feeling a little bit fancy, of course Bull is pretty bad. You want to go supercharged gear and the damage gear, but if you really, you know, Bull is terrible, so you might want to opt for something like this. Again, bushy maps with the damage gears. Basically just always do the damage gear, then the second gear is always up to you. And the hype charge is okay with Bull, but it's starting to be a little bit outdated and a little bit predictable. Next we've got of course a Buster, so slow-mo replay every single time. Star powers, Kevlar Vest is by far the better one. This one is good when there's not any enemies in ranked where they don't have any stun or anything like that, but everyone use Kevlar Vest, it's so good. And then again, it just depends on what map you're playing. So you pretty much go damage gear all of the time with him. And then I normally go speed or +1, depending on whether it's a bushy map. Next up, we've got Buzz. So Buzz, you want to use this gadget pretty much all of the time. It combines really well with his hype charge because you essentially, if you miss your hook, then you could just tap this gadget and then you've got another stun super. So really, really good. And then X-Ray Shades is of course really good on Snake Prairie and a few other situations, so both of them are actually pretty useful. Eye Sharp is by far the better star power, even though this one's really good against assassins, and I think it's actually criminally underrated. Most of the time you want to go Eye Sharp, especially if you're not a good Buzz player. And then I pretty much never really swap away from this. You always want to go damage and then maybe shield, maybe +1 health. It's kind of up to you, but I like to go shield because he's an assassin. Next up we've got Buzz. So of course Buzz, you can't swap away from things. In terms of his best mode, I actually really like all of them. All of them are really, really good. I think Saber is actually the best one, but I like Wing, I like Laser. I think Laser is probably my favorite because I'm more of a sharpshooter. Next up, we've got Byron. So Byron, definitely Booster Shots is by far the better one just because it helps you cycle through supers a lot more effectively. Malace is by far the better star power as well. All the pros use this one. You might want to use Injection if you go for like a really heavy Byron healer composition where you put someone in a hot zone and you're healing in behind, but Malaise is by far the better one. And then I go +1 and the shield gear. You might want to go with damage gear as well though, but I like +1 because you can just spam out booster shots more and cycle through super quicker. And then next up with Cole. So Flying Hook is by far the better gadget, but for the casuals I think that Heat Ejector probably is your best option. It's really good in heist, it's good against tanks. I see a lot of those noobs run this, so it actually is a decent gadget for those noobs. And then in terms of star powers, Protected Pirouette 100%. And then in terms of gears, then I like to go with this setup a lot of the time. I might swap with like health gear as well. You can never go wrong with damage, and then I swap out to like one of these. And yeah, so now moving on to Charlie, starting off with the gadget. Spiders is by far the better gadget. Even since the nerf, it's just better because it helps you tank shots against those sharpshooters. This one can sometimes be underrated, of course, if there's a lot of pierce brawlers that you're facing, but you want to buy spiders if you need to buy one. And then Digestive is the better star power, but only just. Both of them are actually really meh in my opinion. You don't really feel the effects of either of them. kingdoms, so I'd like to see some buffs to them in the future. I mean, you can see I use +1 because you just want to spam those gadgets as much as possible, and then damage you can just go with whatever, to be honest, and then hypercharge definitely isn't worth it. Next up we got Chester. So spicy dice is the better gadget, but like I always say, candy beans, I just like it with Chester, especially when he's a little bit worse off in the meta. You might want to opt for something like candy beans because it can be really clutch. Single Bellamania, by far the better star power, and then I go with shield and damage because since the HP nerf, I actually think he needs that extra bit of health, even though it's only tiny health nerf. So we've got Chuck next. So with Chuck, it depends on the situation. In some maps, the Ghost Train is really good. I think if you're playing a lot more heist, rerouting is better. That's where you use Chuck, right? So that's going to be your optimal gadget. But again, both of them are effective. You use this in like hot zone, other weird situations. And then in terms of star powers, pit stop is your better option for the most part, especially since now you can use your super from respawn, so you can essentially just fly up the map with pit stop. But tickets please is also pretty good. I mean, yeah, if you don't need 4 stops, you may as well go tickets please. And then I usually go for something like this, especially since this bug has been introduced. You go with a shield gear. Before I used to use health gear on him, but now shield gear. Next up we got Clancy. So of course snappy shooting is going to be your better gadget overall. I think the pro players do go tactical retreat, mainly because it's actually pretty hard to get your levels up against good players. So they go with a dash, so you can dash and get close to them. But snappy shooting is going to be your better option. I use that pretty much all the time. Recon is the better star power, by the way. I know this one can be seen as underrated, but the problem with Clancy, especially in this meta, is getting his first levels. So you want this, even though it's 3 tokens, it's crucial to him, the way you play. And then damage and shield gear, never go wrong with that. Colette, you want to go gotcha all of the time, no reason to go to the other one. One of the best gadgets in the game. Push it is better most of the time. Of course, this is good in heist. You guys know how I feel about push it. It's the one that pros use most of the time, but I still get annoyed by it a lot of the time. So it goes mass tax, and then again, it just depends. Most of the time, I go something like this, just because the healing gadget is just so good, and the hype charge is definitely worth buying. Colt is next. So Colt, it does depend on what game mode you're playing. If you're playing high speed loader, this is really good on like Brawl Ball to open up the map, etc. Star powers, I think Slick Boots is the better one overall, especially if you're a good Colt player. If you're a bit more of a noob like myself, I use Magnum Special. Both of them, it's like 50-50. What's not 50-50 is reload speed. You want to use this gear every single time with him. And then again, it is dependent on what game mode you're playing on. If you want to go shield gear or the damage gear with him, you can never go wrong with it. And then next we've got Cordelius. So Cordelius replanting is by far the better gadget to use. So good to jump over walls to counter those squishy brawlers, to combine with your super. This is going to be better on the bushier maps, or if you play a lot of showdown, it can be pretty effective. But yeah, replanting is the better one overall. And then combo shrooms is the better star power overall. I see some people using Mushroom Kingdom. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it feels like you're just wasting your super. It just all depends on how you play with Cordelius. And then I go +1, and then I go with shield most of the time because you want that extra jump. It's really helpful, and the hype charge is definitely worth buying. Next we've got Crow. So Sloan Toxin still is the better gadget for the pros to use. I know defensive booster can be seen as underrated, but I still don't feel like it's that actually good of a gadget. I still feel he's really squishy even with this gadget. Hopefully it gets buffed in the future. And then in terms of star powers, I think Carrying Crow is the one to use, especially in heist. This is probably better in all the other game modes. And then +1 and the shield gear, you can never really go wrong with that. And then with Darryl, I think most of the time you want to use Tar Barrel. The reason why it's so good is because it just helps you slow the opponents down, so then of course you can catch up to them, and then you can deal more damage. Of course, it deals more damage the closer you are to people, so that's why Tar Barrel is good. But both gadgets are actually really underwhelming, but the better Darryl players do go Tar Barrel, that's a fact. And then in terms of star powers, Steel Hoops pretty much 100% of the time. In heist, some people go rolling reload. I still just don't really like that star power in heist. It's just me. I feel super squishy without, and vulnerable without Steel Hoops. And then in terms of gears, then I pretty much always go like this build. If I'm playing knockout, I'll go with shield. And then the hypercharge, it does seem pretty underwhelming, but I think it's a good addition to his kit. So next up we have Doug. In terms of gadgets, Extra Mustard is by far the better gadget to use. It deals so much damage, and you're able to like combo this with a couple of shots, and you can just delete pretty much every brawler in the game. And then of course Star Power Self-Service is by far your better option. It literally helps you win gunfights, or if you're getting shot at range. and you're trying to close the gap onto opponents, you can just heal yourself, so pretty effective. And then in terms of gears, never really swap away from this. A damage gear allows you to heal more as well. Draco, last stand 100% of the time, shredding 100% of the time, and you don't even need to take a look at any of the other ones. And then in terms of your gears, again, I pretty much go this every single time. You never really want to shy away from any of them. I mean, and maybe you want to go like health and +1, but I just go damage because it's Draco. Of course, you want to get close to people. Next up, we've got Dynamite, so satchel charge 100%, demolition 100%. Of course, it allows you to get that extra damage, so crucial. And then I go +1 and shield gear, mainly because you want, of course, an extra satchel charge. You might want to opt for damage gear depending on what type of player you are, but I like the shield gear with Dynamite because you're always going to be shielded up because you're a thrower. Next up, we've got Edgar, so let's fly pretty much every single time. This can be seemed as underrated in ladder, but Let's Fly is by far your better option. Fisticuffs is the better stop power I've found over time, just to help you cycle super more effectively. Hard landing really good against those squishier brawlers. And then shield and damage, I go with this just because he needs all the help he can get right now in terms of the 1v1 interaction. So I really like that. Sometimes I might go with +1 though, if I like the matchups a bit better, for example, so I just need that jump. And then Hypercharge, one of the best in the game, make sure to get it. Primo, in terms of gadgets, Suplex supplement pretty much all of the time. This might be sometimes good in highest or to open up the map with other brawlers, but never go wrong with Suplex supplement. And again, it depends on what Primo player you are. For most people, the speed one's going to be by far your better option. Allows you to make more plays, and if you miss your Primo super, it doesn't really punish you because at least you're close and you've got the speed to close down the gap. El Fuego is going to be good for the extra damage. And then I pretty much never really swap away from this. I might go with like the health gear, but you can never really go wrong with the supercharge gear because it allows you to cycle your super a lot more effectively. Ems is next, and Friend Zone 100%. Bad Karma pretty much all of the time as well. Hype used to be good, but I'll let it go now. It's just not that great anymore. And then I pretty much never swap away from something like this. Bushy Maps +1 because that extra knockback is really, really effective. Eva's next, gotta go 100% of the time. Even with the recent Hypercharge, you can get some cool plays with the amount of healing you can get. But I think the best thing about the Hypercharge is actually just the amount of pressure that it puts out on the field. So yeah, you want to go gotta go. Unnatural order, of course, you want to go every single time. And then especially with the Hypercharge recently, you want to go quadruplets a lot more because you just want as many hatchlings on the field as possible. Fang is next. Roundhouse Kick is by far your better option. I do like Corn Fu a little bit, but yeah, Roundhouse Kick's really good for those 1v1 interactions. Star Powers, Fresh Kicks is going to be your better option if you're a casual. For the pros, I think Divine Souls is better, mainly because he's really bad in the meta, so you just need that extra bit of shield, and you're hardly going to be comboing against pros, and people just know how to counter him. Just go high HP brawlers, and there's nothing that you can do. And then you want to go shield and damage, just to try and help in those 1v1 interactions as much as possible. In terms of gadgets, this is your better gadget with Frank still, even after the nerf. I think active noise cancelling can be really good as well, especially if you're facing off against a lot of counters, a lot of pushback brawlers. Then of course you go this gadget instead. Both are pretty good, but in ladder, in blind pick, I go with this one every time. Star Powers, I go with Power Grab every single time as well. Even though 25% damage doesn't seem like a lot, it is, especially on a brawler like Frank. And then in terms of gears, I never swap away with this, and the Hypercharge is definitely worth buying. So now moving on to Gale, starting off with gadgets, I use Twister pretty much all of the time. And then you want to use Spring Ejector in a few situations, can be pretty good in some certain game modes, and like Hot Zone, etc. In terms of Star Powers, I use Freeze and Snow pretty much all the time, especially since the supercharge rate has been heavily nerfed with Gale. You don't actually get the opportunity to push people back onto walls, so this is definitely the better one now. I mean, you can still get good use case out of that. And then gears, pretty much never swap away from this. Of course, the bushier maps, I go for a build like this, and a Hypercharge is still pretty good, although it's really hard to cycle supers like you used to with it. Gene is next, and you use Vengeful Spirits on like Knockout, Bounty, longer range maps, and then Lamp Blowout everywhere else. I would say Lamp Blowout is just a better gadget because it's just really good with the pull and to defend himself. In terms of gears, I always go Vision and the Mythic gear. And in terms of Star Powers, Magic Puffs pretty much all of the time, unless you're a solo Gene player and you need that extra bit of DPS. Sometimes Spirit Slap can actually be pretty good in Gem Grab, and yeah, sometimes as well you probably need like a third gear with Gene because you might play him on a more open map without bushes, so you might want to go with Health or a Shield gear. Next up, we've got Gray. So Gray is, of course, really good with walking cane. One of the best gadgets in the game in terms of knockout and bounty, fake injury, everywhere else new perspective, because it's really good with tanks. If you guys didn't know, with this star power, effectively with tanks you can heal up to like 3k health because of the amount of HP they have. It's just worded wrong in the star power description, so it's actually really good in gem grab, knockout and brawl ball. And then in terms of gears, I never swap away from this. Really good. Or you might want to go with like damage gear instead of the shield gear if you're playing like playing hot zone or something like that. Next up, we've got Griff. So piggy bank 100% of the time, business resilience on game modes like hot zone. But if you feel like you're gonna use Griff for the damage part, then of course this is still a really good star power. It's not terrible, it is a good one if you're facing off against a lot of aggro, if you're using him for presence on the map, and you've got tough matchups. And business resilience, one of the best star powers in the game. And then I go health and reload gear pretty much all of the time. Sometimes you want to go gadget charge though to open up the map even more, because that's why I use Griff, to open up the map with the piggy bank. So Grom is next. In terms of gadgets, pretty much radio check all of the time, but I would say the niche situations where Grom is good in, like center stage, Snake Prairie, Watchtower, is also a pretty effective gadget to have as well. Star powers, X Factor, 100%. And then in terms of gears, then again, it just depends, because Grom's not in the best of spots right now. I just use +1, so he gets 4 chances to use this to try and confirm a kill. Next up, we've got Gus. So Cookie Popper 100%, Spirit Animal 100%. And then in terms of gears, I pretty much, I don't know, I swap actually a lot with Gus, to be honest. I try and use +1 as much as possible, because you're just increasing the DPS with him. And then it's kind of up to you whether you want to use damage. Damage is really good, especially because it combines with this star power. Health is pretty underrated. Can never go wrong with shield though. I pretty much go shield and +1. And then with Hank, Barricade is by far your better gadget. Use it 100%. It's gonna blow 100% of the time. And then gears, I pretty much never swap away from this. I used to sometimes run +1, but it's just more effective to use this. I mean, you probably could actually get away with going +1 now, especially since the recent tank trait buff with Hank. Next up, we've got Jacky. So Jacky, pneumatic booster, 100%. Counter Crusher 100%. This is just for the reason why Jacky's even useful. Increases her DPS. And then you want to go speed and damage. Of course, if you play Jacky on a non-bushy map for whatever reason, +1 is going to be more effective for that reason. Now moving on to Janet. Starting off with gadgets, drop the base is by far your better option. The way better gadget. Star powers, vocal warm-up, you just have to go this. And then gears, again, I think I play Janet actually more on the bushy maps, so you probably want to opt for something like this, but it could go with like the shield gear as well. Can never go wrong. And the hype charge is one of the best in the game, so make sure to buy it. Next up, we've got Jessie. So spark plug you want to use everywhere except for heist, recall, spring, but I would say the casual players do play Jessie a lot more in heist, so if you had to buy one, maybe you just opt for this for easier pushing, I don't know. And then energize is going to be your better option, but if you are a noob, you gotta, of course, recognize that if you're around like 20k, 30k trophies, and Shocky probably is pretty good in heist, to be honest. And then in terms of the gears, I pretty much never swap away from shield and damage, never going wrong with it. In heist, of course, you want to run like pet power, but I don't think it's actually worthwhile, but get in my opinion. And the hype charge is just kind of meh with Jessie. Next up, we've got Juju. So Elementalist is by far the better gadget now, just because you can combine and just create chaos with this gadget. The extra speed on the water is really good. Invisibility is broken, and the shield is actually really good as well. All three of them are just superb. And then in terms of star powers, it depends on the matchup. So if you've just got a pretty bad matchup with Juju, then this one's actually alright, because it just allows you to tank more. And then of course you've got a good matchup, this one is really broken. So both are effective. I think Numbing Needles is the better star power though, but a lot of pros do use Guarded Gree as well. And then +1 definitely and shield definitely with Juju. Kenji is next. You want to go the healing 100%. You want to go this one 100% of the time as well. And then in terms of your gears, I pretty much never swap away from this. Maybe you want to go for damage though, because you technically get more healing with the trait with damage gear. So yeah, anything like that. Next up, we've got Kit. So cardboard box, you pretty much want to go all the time now. I mean, Cheeseburger is still pretty good if you're using like Darryl compositions, but I think Kit is actually used more as a standalone brawler now, weirdly enough, especially in pro play. Cardboard box is such a good gadget. And then of course, both star powers are pretty meh, just depends on whether you're a showdown player or whether you're 3 versus 3. And then with gears, you don't really want to swap away from +1 and the shield gear with Kit. Next up, we've got Larry. So Larry, auto fallback 100% of the time. This gadget is just absolutely terrible. There's some weird tech with it, but it's just useless in pro play. Never seen anybody use it. Just don't bother with it. And in terms of star powers, I pretty much never swap away from this star power. Such a good one. Of course, it's going to be better in bouncy and knockout, but most of the time to defend yourself against those aggros. And then damage and shield is pretty good. +1 and shield is pretty good. Probably damage and shield is probably the better one. I need to start using that. And then with, of course, Leon, lollipop drop 100% of the time. This is probably only good for noobs, showdown, and maybe like shooting star, and still wouldn't use it there. So I'd rather go lollipop drop. In terms of your better star powers and stuff, I think smoke trails actually is incredibly underrated. I think if you're playing like hot zone, of course, Invisiheal is going to be good, or in some certain situations, I think smoke trails is actually super good in knockout and bouncy, where he's actually better on. And then mythic gear and shield gear is going to be your best option. But of course, if you're not using smoke trails, you might want to go with like the damage gear instead, something like this. And the hype charge is definitely worthwhile buying. Lily is next, so Vanish gadget, one of the best in the game, just buy it. In terms of star powers then, I think Spiky is just a better star power, but I think this one is really underrated, especially if you have a tough matchup. Helps you just get closer towards easier with the movement speed. Cycle is super a lot easier. And then with Lily, I'll probably go with like shield or damage just to help you in those 1v1s, of course, because she's an assassin. Next up, Lola. You want to go freeze frame all of the time. You want to go sealed with kiss pretty much most of the time as well. Maybe in heist you want to go improvise, but sealed with a kiss is such a good star power, keeping you alive really easily. And then with Lola, again, depends when you play her on. Yeah, I think you actually play Lola on a more open map, so you might want to go with like heal or damage gear. And then vision gear Lola is super good, but of course you always want the reload speed gear on her. And then with Lou, you want to go with this gadget pretty much all of the time. Pros sometimes use ice block though, just because say if it's a tougher matchup, especially against heavy hitting snipers, ice block can actually be pretty good if timed well. And then in terms of your star powers, hypothermia 100% of the time. Do not go with star power. It's completely useless. It's just not good. You want to go hypothermia because people get off the loose super pretty quickly, so you just don't need that. And then hypothermia, and then of course +1 and the supercharged gear is going to be better overall. But of course, if you use ice block, then you might want to go with, I don't know, like damage, vision, or something like that. Now moving on to Maisie in terms of gadgets, disengage 100%, tremors 100%. You want to go this combination because you want to dash and use super at the same time. And then tremors really good to confirm kills with a slow. And then I pretty much never swap away from these gears. Damage gear is so good on Maisie, and so is a +1 for that extra dash. And the hype charge is definitely worthwhile getting. In terms of gadgets with Mandy, then I think Cookie Crumbs is the better gadget. I prefer to use that a lot of time, especially in bounty and knockout, because it can help you cycle supers a lot more effectively, help you confirm kills more effectively, etc. This is really good in combination with super as well, and better in like brawl or just weird situations. And then gears, you probably never want to swap away from this, and in my sights is by far the better star power. Max is next, and phase shifter is by far the better star power. Runner gun is the star power that every single pro uses. There's maybe a few cases you might want to run this with Max, but runner gun is by far your better option. The gears is super difficult with Max. I think most of the time you want to run like, I don't know, I use something like this most of the time, because with Max you want to just chip the opponents, so of course health and shield gear just goes really well together. But I think if you want to be an aggressive Max player like Tensai does, you want to go damage gear and +1. The hypercharge is one of the best in the game, make sure to buy it. Meeple is next, so with Meeple, I think the dice gadget is the better one, only just. This one's really good as well, but it's not as effective now that the bugs have been fixed with Meeple. Star powers, I think rule bending is a better one overall, just because it gives reload speed to you and your team. If you're more of a solo Meeple player, then the extra damage is pretty good. I find rule bending is probably the better star power though. And then I got +1 and shield gear, of course, is super squishy, and the gadgets just allow you just to win 1v1 so much easier. Mega's next, so jolting bolts is the better one. Heavy metal is the better one. You want to sometimes use toolbox against snipers, and then I don't know, star power is just terrible. You may as well go this. It helps you defend yourself a lot easier. And then damage and shield, I think you really need shield gear right now with Meg, even though she has a good amount of HP. I think that's the reason why I use her. Get as much HP as possible, then damage gear with her. Next up, we've got Melodie, so interlude 100%, fast beats 100%, and then you need +1 because the interlude gadget is such a good, strong gadget with her. And then either shield gear or damage gear on your preference, to be honest. I mean, maybe some matchups you might not need it. I switch between all three of these gears, to be fair. And then the hypercharge is really good. Not as busted as people say, but really good, like an A tier hypercharge. Mico is next. Clip and Scream is by far your better gadget. Some people use Presto, Clip and Scream is just better. Monkey Business is going to be good pretty much everywhere with him. On Heist or Showdown, that's going to be better. And then Gears, I've never swapped away from the damage and shield gear. And then Sound Check is just not worth buying. Next up, we've got Mo. So with Mo, Dodgy Digging is by far your better option. And then Star Powers, again, both of them are actually pretty useful in pro play. Skipping Stones if you play a lot of ladder. If you play a lot of pro play, Speeding Ticket because it gives you the additional range. And then Gears, again, I never really swap away from this. Can't really go wrong with it. Mortis is next, and Survival Shovel 100% of the time. I mean, some people use that. I don't know why, because Survival Shovel allows you to cycle through supers much more effectively, make more plays. Why wouldn't you want this? And then Chord Snake 100% of the time. Pretty much every single pro player uses this one. Just allows you to make more plays. And then again, it depends. I think it's either shield gear or the damage gear. I think most people actually prefer the damage gear or Mortis because it gives you more healing. It helps you with 1v1 interactions, and a Hypercharge is one of the best in the game, and you have to use the mythic gear with him. It's so good. So now moving on to Mr. P, starting off with the gadget. Service Bell is your better gadget. Some people use Portal Reinforcements, but Service Bell is better. It helps waste one more ammo. In terms of Star Powers, Revolving Door is better, but I think gadgets and Star Powers are really lackluster with Mr. P. I feel like you could just use Mr. P and use him without gadgets and Star Powers, and you probably wouldn't realize because he's just still terrible. And then you want to swap, you just want to go this. Everything about him is just terrible right now. Pet Power is not worth it. Absolutely awful. Nani is next, so again, it's very dependent on the game mode. I think for most Nani players, I think Return to Sender and this Star Power will be better. But if you use Nani in inconvenient game modes like Heist, Hot Zone, whatever, Tempered Steel and TP is going to be really good in Heist particularly. But again, you want to go more so like this. In terms of gears, you probably want to go damage and shield pretty much all of the time. If you're facing off against snipers a lot, you want to go with the extra gadget gear. That can be really effective. And then the Hypercharge is terrible. Do not buy it. Nita is next, and with Nita, I think the better combination is definitely the Faux Fur, a shield, and then bear with me. But I think a lot of people do use stun, especially against tanks, and Hyper Bear really effective. And of course, this is going to be better in Heist. Well, you probably want to go with like this in Heist, and then of course Pet Power in Heist as well. But again, depends. I often use speed gear a lot of the time with Nita. I also see a lot of pros use shield gear with Nita. I think it's because she has very limited range, right? She can get bullied a lot of time, but the extra shield allows her just to push up the walls a lot more effectively. And the Hypercharge is one of the best in the game. Make sure to buy it. Otis is next, and Fat Splatter is a really good gadget, so that's why I go the extra gadget gear with it. Ink refills 100%. And then with Otis, normally play Otis on a bushy map, so I see this build being used a lot by the pros. The Hypercharge is really good as well. Make sure to buy it. Pam is next. Scrap Sucker 100% of the time. Mama's Squeeze you pretty much want to use all the time as well, unless it's a super open map, but Mama's talk about be better. In terms of gears, I probably really go this with Pam, always the mythic gear, and then either the vision gear or the health gear can be really effective with her. Next up we've got Pearl, so Overcooked 100%, Heat Shield 100%. And then with the gears, it depends on whether you're in a bushy map, so vision gear can be really effective with Pearl with like the speed gear. If it's a different type of map, then you might want to go like Knockout, for example. You might want to go with something like this. And the Hypercharge isn't really effective whatsoever. No point buying it. Penny is next, so Salty Barrel 100% of the time. Heavy Coffers 100% of the time. I mean, I like this one in Brubble, for example, can be really good, but elsewhere it's just not that great. And then again with Penny, I probably never swap away from this either, unless it's a super pushy map where you can go with the vision gear. You can never go wrong with damage and shield. Piper is next, so with Piper, again, it depends on whether you play ladder a lot. If you play a lot of ladder, Auto Aim is probably better. But if you play Piper on the game modes where she's the best on, Bounty and Knockout, Homemade Recipe, absolutely. And I actually like +1 and the shield gear with Piper, just because you can confirm 4 kills, which is really essential. Snappy Sniping is by far the better Star Power. Sometimes this can be more useful, but Snappy Sniping is by far the better one. And the Hypercharge is definitely worth buying, one of the best in the game. Next up, we've got Poco. So Poco has started to become back in the meta, mainly because of protective tunes. So really good against Lou, really good against stuns, really good against poison. So you see Poco used a lot with protective tunes to counter certain compositions. So both of them are worthwhile getting. If you play a lot of ladder, then Tune and Fork is better. And in terms of Star Power, Screeching Solo is the better one. The Capo is really good for, you know, the Poco double tank compositions, but just be a Poco player with Screeching Solo, make sure you get that extra damage. +1 is going to be your better option with the shield gear, and the hypercharge is actually okay because you can cycle it so quickly. So now moving on to RT. In terms of the gadgets, Outer Line is by far your better gadget. If you play a more open map, I don't know, like Shooting Star, or just you're not needing it for against assassins, Hacks is also really good to confirm kills, but Outer Line is probably the main reason why RT is still so meta. Star Powers Recording is by far your better option, but like I said, on the more open maps, people use this setup instead, but probably wouldn't recommend buying it because you just most of the time use RT like this, and then +1 and the shield gear most of the time, but then you could either opt for the health gear if you don't think you'll use 4 uses of that gadget. Rico is next, so of course, gadget. Make sure you use the multiple launcher as much as possible and gadget the opponents to death. It's by far the better gadget. Then Star Powers, Super Bouncy is by far the better Star Power in my opinion, but some people get some good value out of Robo Retreat. I can see why people use it, especially against tough matchups, but use Rico for that damage, so use Super Bouncy. +1 and the reload gear, can never really go wrong with it. Reload gear is good on Rico, even though he shoots faster anyways. I think just having the ability to spam even faster is just really good, so I go with that. And then the Hypercharge is one of the best in the game. Next up, we've got Rosa. So Rosa, Unfriendly Bushes is your better gadget overall because you use Rose on super bushy maps most of the time, like Snake Prairie, so that is better. Sometimes Grow Light can be good. Thorny Gloves is your better Star Power as well. The extra DPS is really good with Rosa. Again, you want to go with this setup. Sometimes pros might go with this though, and like Center Stage or Snake Prairie can be really useful. And then the Hypercharge is really good. I'd recommend getting it. Next up, gadgets. So most of the time you want to use air support, but Sandbags is also a really good one, especially against those sharpshooters. But air support is good for map control. Air superiority is the better Star Power because you can break open the map, and that's why people use Ruffs a lot of the time. And then Gears, I probably never really swap away from that setup. And the Hypercharge is pretty good, but not worthwhile getting. In terms of Sam, easy, do not swap away from this, really effective. And then Heart Recovery, literally can't play Sam without it. And then I go with something like this because it's really hard to actually get back to the shield regen with the way that you play with Sam, so just go with something like this, a lot more effective. Next up, Sandy. So Sandy, Sweet Dreams 100% of the time, Rude Sands 100% of the time, unless you're playing like Sandy on an open map, I don't know, like Dueling Beetles. That's probably the only time I want to go healing wins. And then you want to opt for something like this. Of course, if you're playing on a bushier map, you want to go for something like this instead. And then next up, we've got Shade. So Shade, long arms 100% of the time. This gadget just makes no sense. I don't know why it was even a thing. And then Star Powers, you would rather definitely go Hardened Hoodie. It's by far your better option, gives you that extra bit of shield. And then +1 and shield gear, damage gear. Probably want to go with shield gear actually. Definitely +1 though to help you cycle supers more effectively. Shelly is next. Clay Pigeons 100%. Shell Shock is your better option. I can see why people use Band-Aid though, but the healing isn't that great to be honest. So you can go with Shell Shocked, and then again depends what map you play Shelly on. Most of the time you are going to be playing Shelly on a bushier map, so you probably want to opt for something like this instead. Hypercharge is pretty good as well. And then with Spike, Life Plant is by far your better option. In Heist, of course, it's going to be better. And then Curveball is by far your better option still. People think Fertilize is good. I mean, it's okay, especially against noobs, but still find it's too squishy, so go Curveball. And then Mythic Gear and Shield Gear is pretty effective with him. You definitely want the Mythic Gear, and the Hypercharge is really good as well. So now moving on to Sprout, starting off with gadgets. Transplant is by far your better gadget. It allows you just to block off certain choke points whenever you want, and Overgrowth 100% of the time as well. In terms of gears, you definitely want the Supercharge gear because you get your super with 4 shots instead of 5. It's essential for Sprout. And then you want to go +1 or shield gear depending on whether you think you're going to be trapping the opponents a lot. The Hypercharge definitely not worth it whatsoever. Squeak is next. So Squeak, Residue 100%. Super Sticky is the better Star Power now. A lot of pros prefer this. I actually like using this, especially if you're up against a lot of tanks when you need that extra damage. And then with Squeak, I pretty much never shy away from this. Might want to go with health gear sometimes, but damage is really effective. And the Hypercharge is not worthwhile getting. It's really bad. Next up, we've got Stu. So Stu, there's a lot of good things about him. Everything is just good. You can go pretty much everything with him. So Speed Zone, you want to be going on like Gem Grab. You want to be going on Hot Zone maps. And then on those maps where you want to counter certain brawlers, you want to go Breakthrough on like Brawl Ball, etc. Star Powers, Gas the Hill, pretty much 99% of the time. There is some good use case for Zero Drag, and some players can make good plays. And then we're still, you probably never really want to swap away from this build, to be honest, or something like this, really effective with him. And then Hype Charge is one of the best in the game, make sure to buy it. Surge is next. So for the pros, Power Surge actually is a better gadget because people know how to keep their distance against Surge, and especially since the HP nerf, it's a little bit harder to get within distance, so Power Surge is really good. But of course, for most people, myself included in ranked, you can just go Power Shield and you never have to think about it, because there's always going to be a player that just feeds you for no reason because they're just really dumb. Serve Ice Cold, of course, and then I never really swap away from this. Of course, if you've played a Bush map with Surge, you want to go for this. And the Hyper Charge is really, really effective, one of the best in the game. Tara is next. With Tara, you're going to go Support from Beyond all of the time. You only want to go this gadget on Snake Prairie. Everywhere else, you want to go that. And then Healing Shade is by far the better one to use. Some people like Black Portal. I don't really see any use case for it personally. Healing Shade is by far the better one. And then with Tara, I think the best sell probably is something like this, because you normally play Tara on those bushy maps. But then sometimes you might want to go with like +1 if you really want to counter like snipers or single shot brawlers. Tick is next, and Last Hurrah is by far your better gadget. And in terms of star powers, Well Oiled is by far your better star power as well. I sometimes like automatic, but everyone goes Well Oiled. And then you definitely want to go the Mythic gear and the Shield gear. I know some people like going like this setup, especially on the bushier maps. The pros actually use this quite a bit, but of course Tick is super squishy, so go for something like that. And then lastly, we've got Willow. So I'd say that Spellbound is your better gadget overall. Dive, you're going to get the chance to waste a lot of utility from the opponents, but you probably need that extra damage with Willow to help you defend yourself. And Obsession is by far the better star power to use now. I believe Love is Blind is actually bugged right now, so Obsession is your only star power of choice. And then you want to go with something like this with Willow, because the other gears are just pretty useless. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.